First order of business, if everybody rise, we'll salute the flag. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Item number 1 on the agenda is the approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion for approval of the agenda as presented.
I'll second that.
Been moved and seconded that the agenda be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Report on the closed session.
The board met in closed session to confer with its legal counsel regarding 2 matters of existing litigation, which are identified on the closed session agenda, and no action was taken.
Public comment on matters not on the agenda. We don't have any comments. Approval of the March the 16th, 2017 meeting minutes.
I'll move approval of those minutes.
And I will second.
It's been moved and seconded that item number 4, the approval of the March the 16th, 2017 meeting minutes be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Review of monthly year-to-date revenue and expenses. Mark, that's you.
Good morning, Mr. President and members of the board. The monthly cash flow report is for February 2017. For February, the agency started the month with a cash position of $11.973 million. There was no appreciable revenue for the month. Expenditures totaled $1.6 million. Most of that was in the Southport project, with expenditures on the retention payment for Tykert, land expenses, and environmental consulting cost. There were some other expenses in the program management and the Rivers project, and also the RFMP effort. The agency's immediate cash reserves in Fund 870 and 871 were $10.3 million. We currently have $4.9 million parked in the advanced funding account, bringing our agency's overall cash position to $15.3 million for February. In March, you can see in the progress report, the cash balance goes down to 14.9, and also there's a small detail on the latest true-up and advance payment request from the state. And if you look at that, when you look at the reports, you can see that we had about $800,000 worth of expenditures for the period, which goes against the current advance that we have on hand, so it diminishes that amount to $3.8 million. Our total advance request was 26, but since we have 3.8 on hand, we'll get $22 million for the next advance, which will last us between April and September for construction purposes. And that ends the report for the month.
Any comments or questions?
I don't at this time.
Thank you very much. Consent agenda. Consideration of acceptance of financial statement for the fiscal year ending June the 30th, 2016.
I just have a question. Do we want an action of acceptance or what?
Yes, that would be appropriate.
Okay. Well, I'd like to make just one couple comments on the report. I mean, it's fairly thorough as usual, you know, as far as how it's put together. Read through a lot of it. Some of it I understand, but not everything. But just one comment in the management's discussion analysis. It's on page 9, and I don't know who was the author of that portion, whether it was the auditor or staff or other folks, but they talk about the economic outlook, and specifically they talk about the increased growth in West Sacramento, and they anticipate the agency will experience an increase in the flood in lieu fee revenue from the growth. think that's a little misleading in that in lieu fee is, the city's thing, and we don't have necessarily direct control of that. So, I think it's just a little misleading in that case. This says the special assessment will continue to grow to increase on an average of 2% each year due to the anticipated increase in our needs in the flood program. So maybe that's what they were referring to instead of the in lieu, but, wanted to point that out. But based on that, I would move for acceptance of the annual financial reporting.
And I'll second that.
It's been moved and seconded that we accept the financial report. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Regular agenda, presentation of the West Sacramento Levy Improvement Program Implementation Strategy.
Morning, President Denton and members of the board. I thought, given all the advancement in the West Sacramento Levy Improvement Program, that it would be timely to present an update where we've been, where we are with all of the recent accomplishments, and what the outlook looks like moving forward. So the goals of the West Sacramento Levy Improvement Program, pretty much established back in 2007, has continued to be to provide a minimum 200-year level of flood protection for the West Sacramento community, and with the inception of Senate Bill 5, to achieve that goal by 2025. In order to, some sub-objectives, we want to advance projects as quickly as we can to reduce flood risk reduction as quickly as possible in partnership with the State of California, Department of Water Resources, and then also advance the federal project in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and the Department of Water Resources. We also want to partner with the city in improving emergency preparedness, emergency response, and overall general education and awareness about the flood risks to the community. So the table presented here is really to sort of show the history of the analysis or the estimates for the overall levy improvement program for the city. If we go back to the 2007 engineers report, at the time that the assessment was developed, at that time the total project cost was estimated at or around $400 million. And the local share, typically in a federal project, setting, you anticipate about 10%. Engineers report took a conservative look and settled on a 20% local share for funding purposes. And so that's why you see in that graphic there, total project cost of $400 with a local share of about 20% or $84 million. In the Corps, in partnership with WSAFCA and the Flood Board, we embarked upon the feasibility study for the West Sacramento project, the General Reevaluation Report, which was completed in December of 2016 with the Chief of Engineers report, and that placed the overall project cost using the Corps' estimates, very high levels of contingency, at $1.2 billion. Now that, the GRR includes the Southport project with an estimate of a little over $500 million, but it did not include two of our completed projects, CHP Academy and the Rivers, as those were deemed to not be eligible for credit. They were not included in the Corps' feasibility study. They were not included in the GRR. So that $1.2 billion is total West Lip minus CHP and Rivers. As the board is aware, in 2016, we had Wood Rogers and subs provide a problem identification report update and an update to the alternatives analysis. That's the column 4 in the graphic there. And that included all of the projects in West Sacramento, including previously completed projects of, well, let me back up. That did not include the completed projects And so they did not include CHP and the Rivers projects. So what staff has done in order to describe the entire program cost, we've modified the cost estimate under the Corps' GRR to include our most recent cost estimate for the Southport project at $170 million. And then we also added back in the Rivers and CHP. And that way, for those completed projects, and that way we have a modified or updated cost estimate for the federal project, as shown here, of just about $900 million. So that's the GRR with an updated Southport and adding back in CHP and Rivers. And the updated West Slip, based on the 2016 alternatives analysis update, also includes that $170 million estimate for the Southport project, and also includes the completed projects for Rivers and CHP. So we wanted to make sure we had an apples-to-apples comparison of the entire program cost, because as seen in the staff report, when we look at what the flood program's capacity is, we go back in time and roll it forward. This is what the agency's capacity is. This is what the total program costs are, so we can see what our deficit is. So that was the main reason for updating those costs to include the previously completed projects as well as the updated cost for Southport.
Greg, can I ask a quick question here?
Sure.
So the only reduction in costs is the Southport project that were a known commodity? Is that, whereas the future projects are still valued at the core?
Correct.
Okay.
So,
Or
and the CHP and Rivers costs that are added back in are based on the actual cost to
actual
construct.
cost, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
So that's correct. And then as you, it's also outlined in the staff report how we come to these numbers, but the estimated funding gap under the federal project is about $36 million, and the estimated funding gap, according to the updated alternatives analysis completed by Wood Rogers, is about $30 million. And then you can see down below what the relative cost share percentages are for West Sacramento, the state, and also the federal contribution. So some of the key factors that went into looking at the sort of strategy update, you know, sort of first and foremost, the levees do not meet current standards, except for the ones that we've improved. And the city is continue to be exposed to an unacceptable level of flood risk. As was seen this year with record rainfall and continued high water levels, they've stressed our levee system. They've stressed the levee systems in the Central Valley as a whole. And it's really underscored the need for us to continue to move proactively, continue to move quickly to reduce flood risk to the community. We've experienced, you know, a slip on the Sacramento River Levee South, a small slip that was repaired by RD 900. You know, that was one example of the stress on our system. And, you know, there's the Deepwater Ship Channel East Levee, many slips along that landside toe, and a couple that went from toe to crown. Although they don't represent a significant flood risk, they do illustrate that our levees are in substandard condition, substandard materials, perhaps not compacted properly, as well as not the right slopes and geometry. So these are good examples of how our system is stressed, both from rainfall and high water levels. Also, a key factor moving forward is that WSAFCA must sign a federal funding agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers that will commit sufficient local funding in order to complete the federal project. And we may do that in a couple of steps. When we go to pre-construction engineering and design, there's a design funding agreement. And then when we get federal appropriations for construction, there's the bigger agreement with the project partnership agreement, otherwise known as a PPA, that will also be, and at each one of those junctions, the question to the locals is, do you have sufficient funds to complete the project? And of course, we need our answer to be yes. So the additional local funding that we've identified that is required is based both on the core and WSAFCA estimates of the local share of the project. Now, the local share from the previous table, I'll go back just for a quick second. Like I said, the Corps uses a pretty generous contingency when they develop their cost estimates, which is why the original GRR was at $1.2 billion. But even modified with some of the known costs, theirs is still higher than the local cost estimate. So the Corps is going to base our ability to fund the local share on their cost estimate. What we're providing under the WSLIP is hopefully a little more sense of reality and a little tighter contingency for what the costs are likely to be. Another key factor moving forward is our ability to secure a new start for federal appropriations for construction. There are limited numbers of new starts that are authorized or that receive federal appropriations each year. That list is growing. There were a number of projects that were authorized with the WIN 2016, including the West Sacramento project. And so that list is growing. And competition for the new start appropriations is becoming more difficult. And so that is a key factor that we need to address moving forward. And then one of the sort of engineering or technical aspects of securing new start appropriations is our project's benefit cost ratio. Right now we have a 3.2 benefit cost ratio. Office of Management and Budget will redo that BC ratio using different interest rates. I think ours was done on an average of around 3% inflationary cost. OMB uses a different number. It's going to decrease our overall BC ratio, and it may be difficult for us to compete unless we can do some things. It'll make it more difficult to compete unless we can increase or better our benefit cost ratio. So, and I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. So I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about project implementation and the timing thereof. The authorized federal project assumed a 17-year implementation schedule. And the original project schedule looked at the district starting the PED, the pre-construction engineering design, in 2017. They have not started pre-construction engineering and design. They're running a little behind schedule. And so even if that gets initiated in 2018, as is currently forecasted, we're looking at the federal project being completed. Again, if it remains on that 17-year implementation schedule, will not be completed until 2035. Now, Senate Bill 5, as you know, requires the city to have a viable plan to achieve a 20-year, 200-year level of flood protection by 2025 in order so they can continue to issue discretionary building permits. Now, that viable plan means they need to work with a local flood control agency. We work in concert so that we have a plan to improve the levees. So we are the arm of, WSAFCA is the arm of the construction and those improvements that they get the city to that 200-year level of protection by 2025. But what's really on the table, or that can be impacted by that schedule, is the ability for the city to issue building permits if we were not able to reach that goal, or if there's not change to legislation. So our goal, as previously stated, is to achieve that 200-year level of protection by 2025. So now I want to talk a little bit about opportunities. WSAFCA has been able to secure a total of $185 million in state appropriations under Prop 1E. And that's the sum total of all of our design funding agreements and our construction funding agreements with the state. So this is the complete appropriation for a state partnership with us on making improvements. And what we saw with the recent bidding environment, our cost estimate, total cost estimate to implement the Southport Levee Improvement Project is decreased from $200 million to about $170 million. So accordingly, we anticipate there being some surplus, if you will, local funds as well as some surplus state funds that may be available to focus or use for other flood risk reduction projects or programs. And advancing those flood risk reduction projects obviously will help to reduce the risk of flooding to the city and the state more quickly, as opposed to waiting for the federal project. It can give us the opportunity to advance or accelerate the implementation of the federal project in parallel with the activities that the Corps is undertaking. And will give us an opportunity to likely improve the federal benefit cost ratio, making WSAFCA more competitive for those limited federal funds. And before I go on, I want to spend just a couple of seconds, just very roughly or very from a high level, talking about the benefit cost ratio. So obviously, it's the benefit to the community divided by the cost of the program. If we can decrease our cost, we can increase our BC ratio. One example of that, or I think a very good example and real example, is the Southport project. Federal project estimate for Southport was about $525 million. We're showing that we can construct that project for a little under $200 million. So that's a net difference, a net savings, reduction in program cost of about a little over $300 to $350 million. So it's not as simple as replacing the denominator with that smaller number and getting a new BC ratio, but that's essentially, that's how it factors in. So to the extent that we can continue to implement flood risk reduction projects, and experience has shown that we're able to do it more quickly and more economically than the Corps, then we can not only get the flood risk reduction measures implemented sooner, but we can do them at a less cost. And that's where we can work with the Corps to redo the economics and recalculate that BC ratio.
Can I ask another quick question?
Sure.
When does the Corps consider those new reduced numbers real? Is it
So that's
when the project's completed?
That's a good question. So we've checked into that a little bit, or at least I've reached out and asked the very question. And the response I got was the Corps typically, sort of programmatically, recalculates or relooks at the economics every 2 to 3 years. And in my opinion, that's not a very proactive approach to this when we're looking at receiving federal appropriations in 2 to 3 years for construction. So as we'll look at in the next slides, one of the recommendations that we have is to establish a more proactive partnership with the district to more aggressively look at this at a more frequent schedule. We both want to be in a position, we as in WSAFCA, the state, and the Corps want to be in a position to implement these projects. We've all spent a lot of time and a lot of money completing this feasibility study, requesting authorization from Congress, and asking the President to sign an act that authorizes these projects. So we all have a vested interest in now moving some dirt and getting these projects completed. So that's the approach that we're going to take with both the state and the Corps to see if we can have a little bit more proactive approach to our project and its success. So that brings us to recommendations. So number one, we want to advance the federal project with the Corps. We want to are recommending that we expedite the execution of a pre-construction engineering and design agreement. As it stands right now, the district is proposing in the fiscal year 18 and 19 to receive work plan money for pre-construction engineering and design. We want to work with them to make sure that happens, execute that PED design agreement so that we can get the overall project under design and moving towards construction money. Part of that process will also be working with them to select the most appropriate reach to start that pre-construction engineering and design. Also recommended is a strong federal advocacy effort, focusing on how we position ourselves to successfully navigate the New START issues. So we've started working with our federal lobbyists to develop a plan and a strategy, and I'll be sharing that with the board in future meetings or future updates. And then we want to partner with the district, as I mentioned, core district, so that we can refine our total project cost and update our BC ratio in a more opportune time that plays into or that will help give us the support we need to be successful in getting that New START appropriations. Then another recommendation is that we evaluate opportunities for additional local funding. As mentioned, we have a funding gap from the federal project perspective of about $36 million. So one of the main recommendations and direction from the board that I'm looking for today is that we move quickly to start evaluating both the need and timing of that local funding, the additional local funding, in order to meet those federal project obligations, so that we can be in the position, right time, with the right local funding, be able to enter into those agreements and make those commitments for the federal project. What the specific direction that I would ask is that staff be directed to go and evaluate some alternatives, coordinate with the city on those alternatives, and then bring some information back to the board, or those alternatives back to the board for some more specific direction on how the board would like to see us move forward for implementation, both in terms of the magnitude and timing. I think my roller ball has died. Thank you. Uh-oh. There we go. Other recommendations. Staff has recommended that we evaluate both the WSAFCA as well as the state's quote-unquote surplus capacity, and this will be post-Southport. I recognize that we haven't completed the Southport project, but we certainly have entered into a construction agreement, a contract, and we have a pretty good estimate of what those project costs are going to be. So we're going to have to do some forecasting, but so we recommend that we do forecasting both on WSAFCA cash position at the end of Southport, as well as the state's cash position under our existing funding agreements post-Southport, so that we can look at sizing and being able to recommend additional flood risk reduction projects to the board. Also, we're recommending that staff work with the state to explore their interest in implementing additional projects for the West Sacramento flood program. That would be both the use, well, not both, but it would be the use of surplus funds under existing funding agreements. Again, that balance from that $185 million allocation from the state and what's left over after Southport. And those are Prop 1E funds. And we also are recommending that we explore the use of system improvement funds. Now, right now, we're using Prop 1E money that's in the urban pot for the Southport and all of the previous EIPs. But there are other projects, such as the Deepwater Ship Channel West Levee. There are YOLO bypass deficiencies that are part of the federal project recommendation, part of the updated alternatives analysis. And those are things that may qualify for system improvement funds. And so we want to explore with the state the opportunity to use that other pot of money, which there's more of it, to implement those types of programs or risk reduction projects moving forward. And then lastly, because much of the city lies within the Delta, we are eligible for the use of Prop 1 funds. And so we want to explore with the state the use of those Prop 1 funds to implement future flood risk reduction. And that wraps up my presentation. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions or explore any of this in a little more detail as the board wishes.
You have questions?
You have a question?
Well, Deb, go first.
Thank you for the presentation and the, I think, obviously, there's a lot of work ahead of us. I think asking the state for the, potentially the excess, do we have any sense of whether or not that has happened with some frequency in other jurisdictions? I guess I'm asking the likelihood question, and I know that evaluating it means you may not know yet, but just.
Well, what I would say is, all of the local flood control agencies that are doing these projects, when they have an allocation from the state, they don't want to let it go. We're no different.
Okay.
And so we're going to fight to keep our allocation and put it to use locally. Unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, but the circumstances that we find ourselves in, especially with this very wet season, there were, declarations of emergency throughout the state this winter. There's a lot of people competing for a limited amount of money. And so it's going to be a thoughtful process that we're going to have to undertake with the state, to get them to see things our way, if you will, and to partner with us. They are our partners in the future federal project, and both financially and as well as project team. And so they do have an interest in advancing that federal project and reducing flood risk to our community and improving state plan of flood control levies. So, it's really just helping them recognize the value that we have now in moving forward. So, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but.
Billy, got any questions?
I have a question in reference to the Deepwater Channel.
Yeah.
The land side section where we had the slips and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
What do we estimate, has that increased our estimated cost of redoing that levee?
No, it doesn't affect the estimated cost of fixing that levee to meet the federal project.
Yes.
That doesn't change. What would change potentially is if we do an intermediate fix. So if we do a repair, which doesn't repair it to or rehabilitate it to the future federal project condition, then it's not in the federal interest and would not qualify for credit towards the federal project. So a repair to put it back into its, from a geometry standpoint and a material standpoint, to put it back in the condition that it was prior to the slip would not qualify us for federal credit. So it would be a sunk cost. Now, there are other ways, and I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because one of the things I meant to talk about in my presentation but didn't, is specifically with some of the damage that we had this year. We are working with Reclamation District 900 to submit for repairs under the Corps' rehabilitation program, otherwise, PL 8499. And those repairs will be done on the Corps' dime with no cost share by the locals, provided there are no betterments. And so we are seeking to have the Corps do those repairs, which would not then have a financial impact to WSAFCA's budget, and then we could then focus on other risk reduction projects. And we're also coordinating with the city, RD 900, as well as Yolo County OES on FEMA relief or FEMA funds for costs incurred both for the Sacramento River levee repairs as well as any costs associated with repairs due to the slips on the Deepwater Ship Channel East levee. So we are proceeding with those, as well as, per your authorization, to do some emergency repairs to fix the drainage issue, because the tow drain is now completely blocked. And so we are moving forward with that, and we will be bringing back a recommended design alternative probably at the next board meeting or the one shortly thereafter.
So that work will be something that WSAFCA will oversee, or RD 900 will perform?
WSAFCA will oversee the contract and will oversee the financing of the contract, and we will be, and RD 900 will be a partner with the team for implementation.
Okay.
And those costs, we would look at seeking reimbursement from FEMA. And we also see the drainage solution as being part of the overall federal project for the fix of that levee, so we'd also be seeking to get credit for the work that we do on the drainage solution as well.
Will the city get FEMA funding for water, for piping along the streets and stuff? There's several areas in Sacramento proper that needs piping for get rid of stormwater. It comes out of small ditches and stuff that are
Yeah.
not the responsibility of RD 900, but of the city. But we get the complaints.
So if the city has, so I'm going to break it into two parts. What the city can apply for and receive from FEMA under the emergencies would be costs and damage, or costs incurred as a result of the severe winter storms. And so that would be cost incurred to fix those to whatever standard they fixed them to. When you're talking about improvements, the city potentially could apply for grants under FEMA or other places to implement drainage solutions that would prevent or minimize flooding. But under the reimbursement from the emergency, it's only for costs incurred as a direct result of the emergency. If that makes sense.
Greg, I got a few questions, sort of clarifications. The PED funding or moving ahead with the pre-construction engineering design, that is different from the full design funding agreement? Is that?
Yeah, so it's, I'm not too sure of the percent design, for example, that
PED does?
PED does, but it's less than 100%. Let's say it gets up to 50 or 65, I'm not sure. Do you have a, all right.
So that can go forward without a design funding agreement in place?
No, we would enter into a design funding agreement, but it's not the project partnership agreement for construction.
Okay.
Also, the money that the Corps gets for PED comes through their annual work plan budget, which is different than federal appropriations for construction of the West Sacramento project, which is the New Start. And as I understand, one of the check boxes that we need to have in place in order to qualify for New Start construction appropriations is getting through PED. So it's important that we get into the pre-construction engineering and design agreement with the Corps quickly so we can advance that and position ourselves for that construction funding under the New Start.
Okay, so when you're talking about the PED, it is the same as the design funding agreement that you...
Yeah, it is a design
Oh,
funding
okay,
agreement.
Okay, but you talked about, in order to get that agreement in place, we need to show proof of funding. Are they looking at our ability to fund that process or the whole project? Because are they going to be interested in designing without knowing the final?
So, when I'm going to back up a minute and answer this in kind of a roundabout way, unfortunately, because I don't know the specific answer.
okay.
But I suspect we need to demonstrate, or at least promise, if you will, that we are going to be able to deliver on the full local share of the entire project. Much the same way that when we went back to DC and for the Civil Works Review Board, we pledged that we either do or will have the local match needed to implement that federal project. Had we not been able to say or pledge that we will, we would not have passed the Civil Works Review Board. And I think in much the same way, we're going to have to, swear on a stack of Bibles. I don't know that we'll actually have to prove through our cash flow worksheets or budget, but we are going to have to demonstrate to some degree and with some assurities that we can implement the full federal project. Not just design, not just 65% design of one reach, and that's all we can do. That's not.
Right.
That's not going to do it.
That's what I was trying to
Yeah.
to get at. So we're going to have to keep pushing on this thing and keep revising everything that's going on.
That's correct.
Couple other questions. You talk about OMB and the issue of New Start. The BC ratio there, and you said that could change because they could use different interest rates or view it different. Will they take into account the reduced costs based on what we've completed? Or are they still looking at that 1.2 billion?
So that's part of what I'm trying to learn and figure out so that we can plan for it. But my understanding is OMB will take the current numbers as they exist. So unless the Corps produces revised numbers, then OMB doesn't know they exist.
Okay, so that goes back to that. When does the Corps recognize that the costs are different?
That's correct.
Okay, well, we gotta, that's an initiative we have to stay on. Then the state monies and the like, and the idea, I know our goal is to provide as much flood protection to the city as quickly as possible. And part of that is looking for these alternatives to, partner with the state and, move forward on the federal project without the feds at this point. It appears that depending on how far we're able to go, we'll get to the point where we've produced enough of this project that our credits that we've generated are in excess of, what our participation was. And I remember from before, you guys talking about no matter what, we do have a 5% cash participation in stuff. So we could, without the federal participation coming in quick enough, that percentage of local share could increase on us.
Yes, I think the first goal that we would have and the recommendations that we would bring to the board for anything that we would implement would be what I'll term no regret projects moving forward, meaning that we have the available funds, we have a willing partner with the state or whoever is our partner, and that we're not, and whatever we implement will not exceed our ability to secure federal credit that would be applied to the future federal project. If we had an unlimited supply of money in the state too, and we just kept marching forward, we would find ourselves in a situation where we've expended more than what the local share otherwise would have been. And then now the state and or the Corps then has a less of a burden in order to finish the rest of it. So it would be pretty difficult for us to move that fast to get upside down on the credit, but
Except for, could the feds be that slow? I mean, that's the...
So those are decisions that I think the board is going to have to make moving forward, and to your point, we'll do as much as we can, as quickly as we can, being mindful of the impact to our overall share of the federal project, and those are analyses and evaluations that we'll make on a case-by-case basis moving forward. If we're able to bring a project to the board for consideration, part of that analysis, how does this impact the federal project? How does this impact our overall federal project cost? How might this positively impact the BC ratio? How does this impact our ability to secure federal credit and not get too far ahead of that credit? That should be all of the things that we would bring to you for your consideration before authorizing us to move forward to design and construct something.
Okay. Well, all that brings us to the big hole here is the difference in the amount of monies we have available now versus what we may need to either have realistically or show as we go forward in putting these agreements together. And it's kind of interesting. You look at that original $400 million design and how there was, I know it's different cost numbers and different ratio numbers, but back in 2007, they estimated it pretty darn close. And when, as far as the 800 million or 80 million, and then likewise adding on the Measure V funds later on, we're basically there. But as we stand now, we have, the flood program as a whole has kind of been broadened some to include, other factors as far as flood protection, and so the in lieu fee at this point has not been available to us. So what we need to do, at least I think starting out, we need to start to look to how are we going to, supplement our current assessment. Whether that means a revised assessment at some point or whatnot, we'll see. But I think at this point, we need to maximize our assessment dollars right here and now. And that's where, I think this whole discussion is very timely in that we're moving forward in developing our budget for the next 2 years in conjunction with the city. And I think we need to have some good discussions with them as to, what our services are being provided and those type of things to make sure we know for sure that we're getting very efficient use of our assessment dollars. And, I know there's been discussions back and forth on, the in lieu fee dollars on how they can be used and related uses and that, but the assessment specifically is for levee construction. And I think we need to make sure that that is in place and it's all clear going forward, because every, $100,000 we can save on an annual basis will, go towards future bonding capacity to be able to participate with the state or the feds or whoever. And then we'll also, limit what we may need to ask the citizens in additional funds. So, that's just my comments right now as we move forward. And I know in this, probably next month, we'll have some presentations to us, and, I'm looking forward to working through. So, I don't know, anybody else have any comments to that, or?
Agree with you 100%.
Okay.
All right, so the one last thing I would say is that before we really endeavor and expend a lot of staff time and dollars on behalf of WSAFCA, exploring any of these endeavors, we'll do some reconnaissance, we'll bring things back to the board individually. So this was kind of an overall summary of a lot of moving parts, and I foresee in the future us bringing a very focused discussion. They may be at the same board meeting, but there'll be a focused discussion on future local funding, a focused discussion on surplus capacity, a focused discussion on opportunities to implement additional flood risk reduction projects. So those will come back in discrete packages for more focused analysis and direction from the board.
I still think that time is of the essence, and when we look at our funding, it has to come up. Be resolved right away.
Yeah, I would agree.
Anything, kiddo? I guess the next item on the agenda is project updates.
Well, I guess that's me again. So I'm going to make it pretty short and sweet, as sweet as it can be. Regarding the Southport Levee Improvement Project, I just wanted to update the board. As the board knows, we completed and certified a subsequent EIR, basically for the Borrow 1 site for material for the project. The Corps just completed their companion document, a supplemental environmental assessment with a finding of no significant impact. So both the CEQA and the NEPA are completed now, so that there's no restrictions on the use of the Borrow 1. Real estate services staff, Paul, has done a fantastic job putting together real estate reimbursement requests to the state. We submitted another package for $3.3 million. Right now that sits with the cadastral unit. Once they concur, DWR will be able to process that reimbursement. He has also submitted a package for reimbursement for relocations, totaling about $700,000. Looking forward to getting those reimbursements from the state in the near future. The project itself for construction, the conditions have been less than ideal for construction. Pre-construction activities have been limited. So what's been occurring out there in the field is primarily tree removal, some demo of structures. Unfortunately, there are some nests of migratory birds in some of the structures and/or trees, so those cannot be touched until said birds hatch and fly away. And then, as long as the weather continues to improve and conditions can dry out, then the contractor will be able to move forward with doing their exploratory borings for mixed design. We'll be able to move forward with the borrow site sampling and testing, which as of today, they have been unable to do because of the soggy field conditions. I think the last thing I will mention is our 408, as I understand it, is sitting on the colonel's desk for signature. I'm bugging the Corps daily to get that signature so we can have our 408 in hand, so there's no restrictions on any of the activities that the contractor can do. Fortunately for us, the construction of the setback levee does not touch a current federal levee, which is the first phase of construction. So even without the 408 in hand, they can move forward with that. Sure would make us feel a lot better if we had that 408 in hand. And then the cultural, the 106 process with the Corps for cultural resources, we're still working with them every day to get the final concurrence for us to have no restrictions for all of the ground disturbing activities that we're going to need to do for construction. And we anticipate closing that. It's such a difficult target to try and define, but we're hopeful that we can get that 106 concurrence completed sometime next week. We're working with the Corps staff to respond to the final comments to the SHPO as well as to one of the Native American tribes. So,
Can you bring us up to date on that flood insurance thing?
on the community rating system,
Yeah.
what has, the latest was an additional package was sent back to FEMA staff that work on the community rating system for evaluation. They just acknowledged receipt of that. I think the package was due April 30th. I think it went back last week or the week before. But it was a significant amount of material, and it's going to take them some time to review. Our hope out of that is that we'll be able to move from a rating of 6 to one more notch improvement to a rating of 5. Won't have any impact on flood insurance discounts, but it still gets us, closer to where we want to be ultimately, which is a 1 or a 2.
I think somewhere along the line, we should be communicating that discount figure to the people of West Sacramento.
Yeah, I know that we've communicated it to the city council, and I'm not sure that we've done any community outreach yet.
Okay.
But your point's well taken, and we do want to get that out to the community so that they know what to expect.
Great.
I believe it was in some kind of announcement, highlights or something.
Highlights
I
article?
believe it was shared with the community, at least through that mechanism.
Okay.
I don't know if it'll be in a billing statement or some other place as well, but I know that I know it's been out on social media,
Okay.
at least.
Yeah, there's an article posted on the westsacfloodprotect.com website under the news link.
Okay.
posted
and
there.
Do we have an highlights article for it?
I think it was pulled due to some language that was
We
not.
wanted to make sure that it was accurate?
Yeah, so it was pulled, but there's still an article similar on the West Sac Flood Protect.
Okay.
The idea is to continue to promote participation in the flood insurance program, so.
That's
the deal.
the recommendation.
Anything else? You got anything else you want to bring up?
That's all I have. I'll check with the general manager. He says no. So that concludes it.
Meeting's adjourned.
Make it time? All right.
I know. I already sent him an email, like, I can